The Amazing Race Australia 3 is the third series of The Amazing Race Australia, the Australian version of The Amazing Race. Officially titled The Amazing Race Australia v New Zealand, the race featured 10 teams of 2, each in a pre-existing relationship, in a race around the world for a $250,000 Australian dollars grand prize. The show has a premiere date for Australia's 7 network for August 4, 2014 after the X Factor's Monday show. New Zealand's TV2 has the premiere date for August 5, 2014 after its airing of My Kitchen Rules Australia 5. Australian intensive care nurses Daniel Little and Ryan Thomas were the winners of the race. Production, development and filming. On August 14, 2012, the 7 Network announced the show was looking for contestants for its third series. Despite calling for contestant applications, the show was absent in the 7 Network's 2013 upfronts and was replaced by an unsuccessful revival of the Australian version of The Mole. The show was then renewed again on October 22, 2013. It was also announced that Seven's in-house production company, Seven Productions, would produce the season and Active TV would not be involved, unlike the previous 2 seasons. Filming began in March 2014 at Uluru in Uluru-Katujuta National Park. The race will travel across 6 continents and 10 countries and will be over 90,000 kilometers long. It is the first time that one of the international spin-offs of The Amazing Race has traveled to all 6 inhabited continents, and the race course is the longest amongst the spin-offs. The speed bump was introduced for this series, replaced marked for elimination. It required a team that finished last in a non-elimination leg to perform an additional task some point during the next leg. The Express Pass returned since the first series, allowing the team that places first in the first leg to skip any later task in the race. The Salvage Pass also returned, however it was awarded to the team that arrived first in the 6th leg rather than the first. Casting applications for the third series originally opened during the second series despite the show not being officially renewed by 7 Network. Later, when the show was officially renewed for 2014, applications opened again, with the show now being open to citizens of New Zealand. Applicants who applied previously were given the chance to update their application or leave it as it was. This second round of applications ended on December 22, 2013. Jesse was previously a contestant on the first season of New Zealand Idol, which also aired on TV2. However, he withdrew to attend to the birth of his and Kat's daughter before returning for the second season, where he placed 4th. Tyson Smith proposed to Sally Yamamoto on episode 6 of the race, which was on their 4th anniversary. Marketing: Kathmandu, John West Tuna and Virgin Australia are the sponsors for this season. Results: the following teams are participating in the race, each listed along with their relationships as announced by 7. A red team placement means the team was eliminated. A green indicates that the team won a fast forward. An underlined leg number indicates that there was no mandatory rest period at the pit stop and all teams were ordered to continue racing. An underlined blue team's placement indicates that the team came in last on a non-elimination leg and had to perform a speed bump during the next leg of the race. A purple I micron indicates that the team decided to use the first express pass on that leg. A magenta E unregistered trademark indicates the team has previously been given the second express pass and used it on that leg. A brown ash florin indicates that the team chose to use the U-turn. Ash indicates the team who received it. Matching colored symbols indicate teams who worked together during part of the leg as a result of an intersection. Prizes were awarded throughout the race, generally to the first placing team for each leg, but also for special tasks that took place throughout the race. Most prizes were sponsored by Virgin Australia and their affiliated products. Leg 1 a €2 express pass is a euro an item that can be used on the race to skip any one task of the team's choosing up until the 5th leg of the race. The winning team keeps one for themselves but must relinquish the second to another team before the end of the 3rd leg of the race. Also 2 business class tickets flight to Los Angeles. Leg 2 a euro, leg winner, $10,000 Australian dollars voucher and 2 frequent flyer cards for the winning leg. Step counter task, a 30-minute head start for leg 3. Awarded to Daniel and Ryan. Leg 3 Euro 2 tickets with Virgin and codeshare partners Etihad Airways to one of their European destinations and $5,000 spending money. Leg 4 Euro 500,000 Velocity frequent flyer points which they can use on any Velocity reward of their choosing. Leg 5 Euro first class tickets train tickets to their next destination for themselves and a team of their choice. Leg 6 Euro a 5-star, 7-night holiday for 2 to Phuket, Thailand from Virgin Holiday and Salvage Pass Euro, which has the power to give the holder an hour time credit or to save the last placing team from elimination. Leg 7 Euro 2 business class tickets flight to Abu Dhabi. Leg 8 Euro 10,000 Australian dollars voucher and a platinum Velocity frequent flyer card. Leg 9 Euro a 5-star, 7-night holiday for 2 to Bali, Indonesia from Virgin Holiday. Leg 10 Euro, first place, 250,000 Australian dollars, second and third place, 1 million Velocity frequent flyer points, location matching task, 2 business class tickets to Los Angeles. Awarded to Daniel and Ryan. Race summary. Leg 1. Air date, August 4, 2014. August 5, 2014, Ulua to the first UK to Twa to the first to National Park, Northern Territory, Australia, Alice Springs to Christchurch, New Zealand, Christchurch, Geraldine, Peel Forest, Geraldine. In the first roadblock of the race, one team member had to navigate a tractor through a course and move 4 bales of hay into the marked area. Once this had been completed, they had to go to a sheep paddock and find the sheep with the exact match of the other half of the ring from the rafting challenge. Additional tasks: at the starting line, the teams were divided into 5 teams of 2 and represented their countries competed in a trans-Tasman tug-of-war. Once the side was able to grab their national flag from below the rope, they were given a 10-minute head start to the airport, while the losing side had to wait out the 10 minutes before being allowed to start the race. Upon arriving at the cardboard cathedral, teams had to pick one of 3 departure times for the following morning, 8 a.m., 8:15 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. At Rangitata River, teams had to raft down Grade 5 rapids and find one half of a ring from the Lord of the Rings buried in the sand. After the roadblock, teams had to join the 2 rings together to reveal their next clue, instructing them to go west to the pit stop. Leg 2. Air date, August 11, 2014. August 12, 2014, Christchurch to Siem Reap, Cambodia, Siem Reap, Siem Reap, Siem Reap, Siem Reap, Siem Reap. In this leg's roadblock, one team member went into Angkor where they had to count number of monks wearing red and yellow necklaces. Once all monks were counted, they collected an offering to present to 2 other monks inside the temple. The racer would have to pick one of the 2 monks to give the answer to, but one of the monks would lie if the racer had the right answer anyway. Once the truth-telling monk was told the correct answer, he would give them their next clue. In the race's first detour, teams chose between shrimp and shoot. In shrimp, teams had to collect shrimp from fish traps in the Tonla copyright sap using traditional methods, reaching a total of 750 grams of shrimp. Once they had enough, the fishermen would hand over their next clue. In shoot, teams had to travel to the floating village of Chong Khneas and find the local pool hall, where they had to level out a pool table and then sink 5 balls while competing against a local player. Additional tasks: at the old market, teams had to eat a total of 7 fried tarantulas, with individual team members required to eat at least 3. Once complete, the street vendor would give them their next clue. Upon arriving at Angkor Wat, teams had to buy tickets at an information center, where they would also receive a step counter that they had to wear for the rest of the leg. At Jupsnay restaurant, teams would mark down the reading that their step counter had accumulated so far. The team that had the 2 closest amounts of steps between each team member would receive a special prize at the end of the leg. Leg 3. Air date, August 18, 2014. August 19, 2014, Phoi Phit to Bangkok, Thailand, Bangkok, Bangkok to Krabi, Onang, 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 Krabi. In this leg's detour, teams chose between climb up and drill down, Both detour options required teams to travel by long-tail boat to Phra Beach. In climb up, teams had to scale a sheer rock face to retrieve a race flag. Once both team members had obtained a flag, they could exchange their flags for their next clue. They climbed with Real Rocks Climbing School located in Railay Beach, under the expertise of a local climber named Tick who oversaw all the challenges. In drill down, teams had to first build a hand drill and then use it to extract enough coconut juice from a pile of coconuts to fill a container to a marked line. Once the juice reached the line, they received their next clue. In this leg's roadblock, one team member had to travel to a marked area of the sea in their boat and dive down to retrieve golden clams from the sea floor. Some clams contain pearls which when opened, contain their next clue. Additional tasks: at the start of the leg, teams had to first take a taxi to the Cambodian-Thai border and cross it on foot, before taking a bus to Bangkok. At the Golden Beach Resort Massage Parlor, teams had to choose a Thai massage treatment from the board, written entirely in Thai. Some treatments took much longer than others, so it was down to teams to pick the shortest treatment possible. Leg 4. Air date: August 25, 2014. August 26, 2014, Krabi to Windhoek, Namibia, Windhoek, Windhoek, Windhoek. In this leg's roadblock, one team member had to cut up a pile of offal and prepare the correct quantity, using an example, to feed to a pride of lions. Once they had fed all their meat to the lions and returned with empty buckets, they would receive their next clue. In this leg's detour, teams chose between pipe and poo. Both detour options required teams to travel to a local village by donkey cart. In pipe, teams had to use a traditional method of making fire. Once they had built enough of a fire to allow the village chief to light his pipe, they would receive their next clue. In poo, each team member had to participate in a local game called Bok Drool, which required them to spit pellets made up of elephant dung across a line which was 8 m away from their start point. Once each member made it across the line, they received their next clue. Additional tasks: at the Namibia Wildlife Sanctuary, teams had to lead 2 baboons along the marked path. Once both baboons made it along the path, teams received their roadblock clue. At the Bush School, teams had to learn a song in the local San language and perform it with the children to receive their next clue. Leg 5. Air date: August 25, 2014. September 2, 2014, Windhoek to St. Petersburg, Russia, St. Petersburg, St. Petersburg, St. Petersburg, St. Petersburg, St. Petersburg, Indiana. This leg's roadblock, one team member had to decipher the message which was being communicated by the ship commander from the top of the battleship in semaphore. Once the message was deciphered, teams received their next clue. In this leg's detour, teams chose between Cossack and Coat Rack. In Cossack, teams had to learn the traditional Cossack dance. Once the instructor is satisfied with their effort, they received their next clue. In Coat Rack, teams had to search through a pile of over 300 tags to find the one that is missing. They had to then search the coats in the coat room for the missing tag. Once they handed the correct missing tag to the attendant, she would hand them their next clue. Additional tasks: the clue received at the roadblock was simply a photograph, leaving teams to work out that their next destination was Nevsky Prospect. At the Tallinn Imperial Hotel's Imperial Ballroom, one member from each of the intersected teams had to enter a vault full of highly sensitive lasers to retrieve a jeweled egg, which would lead them to the next pit stop, the Church of the Saviour on Spilled Blood. Leg 6. Air date: September 1, 2014. September 9, 2014, St. Petersburg to Kostroma, 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 Kostroma. In this leg's detour, teams had to choose between boil and build. In boil, teams would have to fill a Russian outdoor bathing kettle with water until it reached the marked line, and also use wood and paper scraps to light a fire underneath it. Once the kettle was full and the fire was going, teams had to submerge themselves in the icy water before receiving their next clue. In build, teams would have to stack all of the provided firewood following the traditional method. Their stack had to completely fill the marked area. Once their stack was complete, teams would get their next clue. In the roadblock, one team member would have to ride a dog sled around a slalom course through the forest to receive their next clue. Additional task: at the Museum of Wooden Architecture, teams would face on nation versus nation task against their country. Each team would select a matryoshka doll and then have to search among hundreds of other nesting dolls in 5 separate houses to find the 4 smaller pieces that belonged with the one they had chosen. Once all members of their country's team had completed their matryoshka dolls, they would all receive their next clue. Leg 7. Air date: September 8, 2014. September 16, 2014, Moscow, Moscow to Lisbon, Portugal, Lisbon, Lisbon to, Lisbon, Cascais, Cascais, Sintra. Teams would be transported from the previous pit stop to Moscow, and departed from in front of the Warikovo Borisoko Matoshin. In this leg's detour, teams had to choose between wet and dry. In wet, teams made their way to a section of the Lisbon street celebrating the Agatagada Art Festival, where thousands of umbrellas were hung above the streets. Teams would be tasked with counting all of the yellow umbrella. When they wrote the correct answer on a chalkboard and presented it to a judge, they would get their next clue. In dry, teams had to find a group of women on the streets and receive a laundry basket from them with their name attached. They then had to search among the clotheslines above the nearby streets for one article of clothing with the same name tag. In the roadblock, one team member had to pick up a large fish, mussels and octopi and carry them across town to the Cozinha Portuguesa restaurant. They had to bring at least 5 kilograms of octopus with them. Once they delivered their seafood, they would then be served a traditional Portuguese fish stew, cataplana, which they had to eat to earn their next clue. Additional tasks: at Tortobellum, teams had to memorize and perform a traditional Portuguese song, Fado do Cancer Section O. If they could sing all of the Portuguese words correctly with proper musical timing, they would receive their next clue. Teams had to ride the city trolley from Fábrica Santana to Lago das Portas do Sol. Leg 8. Air date: September 15, 2014. September 23, 2014, Lisbon to Dubrovnik, Croatia, Dubrovnik, 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 Dubrovnik. Dubrovnik, 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 Dubrovnik. In the only fast forward of the race, one team had to collect 3 prayer cards from 3 different local churches and then deliver them to a local barber to get a friar tuck haircut or a nun haircut. Once both team members' hair had been cut, they would receive their fast forward clue. For the speed bump, Ashley and Jarrod had to both properly tie a necktie on each other, to be able to continue racing. In the leg's first roadblock, one team member had to abseil face first jumping down the side of Fort Boca to receive their next clue. In the leg's second roadblock, the team member who did not perform the previous roadblock had to climb up Fort St. John to receive their next clue. Additional tasks: after arriving at the Ploa Gate, teams had to choose 2 stones and carry them up to the Watchman's Keep in the city walls. Once there, they had to correctly answer the question of the city guard, however they did not know he was going to ask the number of stairs that they had to climb to reach him. At the Old Harbour, teams had to sign up for one of 3 departure times, each 15 minutes apart. Leg 9. Air date: September 15, 2014. September 30, 2014, Dubrovnik to Buenos Aires, Argentina, Lujain, Buenos Aires, San Telmo, or Buenos Aires and Recoleta, Tigre, Tigre. In the leg's roadblock, one team member had to direct a horse-drawn carriage to a marked polo field. Then, they had to prepare a horse for a polo competition by properly dressing and saddling it. They had to pass inspection by a local polo player in order to receive their next clue. In the detour, teams had to choose between tango and tribute. In both tasks, teams had to begin the task by picking up a specific book from off of the nearby table. In tango, teams had to make their way to Paisage de la Defensa, where both team members had to learn how to perform a complex tango routine. If they could dance to the satisfaction of a judge, teams would get their next clue. In tribute, teams had to search the specific page of their book for a location, which would be La Bombonera. There, they would find a soccer player, who would ask them a question in Spanish. He would ask them to find in the book the name of the hospital where Diego Maradona was born. If they could find the hospital in the book and present it to him, he would hand them a piece of paper directing them to the grave of Evita Pira Cubden. There, they would find their next clue. Additional tasks: after the roadblock, teams would be directed to Buenos Aires' most dramatic bookstore, leading to figure out it to El Ateneo Grande, a former theater which is converted to bookstore. At the Argentina Rowing Club, teams would have to row a canoe upriver to the pit stop at the Tigre Rowing Club. Leg 10. Air date: September 25, 2014. October 7, 2014, Buenos Aires to Los Angeles, California, United States, Los Angeles, Los Angeles, Los Angeles, Los Angeles to Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, Moorabbin, Apollo Bay, Port Campbell, Port Campbell, Port Campbell, Port Campbell, Port Campbell. In the final roadblock of the race, one team member have to match an item above the barrel associated with each pit stop. Greeters visited the race and must all of the items are placed in correct order. Once they finished, they will receive their final clue. Additional tasks: at the Hollywood Walk of Fame, teams had to get a photo with 3 movie characters that were portrayed by Australian-born actors. Then teams had to check the photos at Ray's Photo Shop. If the photos are correct, they will give their next clue. At Pink's Hot Dogs, teams had to eat a traditional Pink's hot dog in order to get their next clue. On the flight to Melbourne, teams had to name the locations on the Virgin Australia's route map. The best performing team on this task won a special prize. At the Great Otway National Park, teams had to find their next clue on the site. After finding their clue at the Great Otway National Park, teams had to begin an air, land and sea task. For the air element, teams had to search from their helicopter for something of interest. If they found this word, they would be set down and must go to a dock to find a fisherman, who will give them their next clue and an item to be used later. After finishing the second task, teams continued the air, land and sea task by finding their second item in a large sandcastle. Then teams had to paddle out to collect their third item. After the air, land and sea task, teams had to figure out the next location based on the items they found, and refers to Lockhart Gorge. Additional note: for the flight from Los Angeles to Melbourne, all teams were given a free upgrade to Virgin Australia's business class. Ratings: Australian ratings. All ratings data in Australia are taken from the 5 major metropolitan centres. Data from regional areas is not accounted for. Due to poor programming from 7, there is no set time slot, but the start time for the show is around 8:40 p.m. to 9:10 p.m. Times are taken from electronic programming guides which still may not be accurate to the real start time. Despite the lower ratings compared to the previous seasons, the show very rated well in time shift, often being the highest increaser for the night. New Zealand ratings, references. External links: Official 7 website, Official TV2 website.